players can just jump right into, like Quake 3 or the upcoming Team Fortress 2.
After Valve announced a sequel to Team Fortress in 1998, it took almost a decade until fans could hear Gabe Newell say the following words.
Welcome to Team Fortress 2. After 9 years in development, hopefully it will have been worth the wait.
And for the majority of the fans, it absolutely was. Team Fortress 2 was a big success for Valve, and till this day, it is one of the most popular games on Steam. And in this video we will have a look at what happened over the course of these 9 years and how Team Fortress 2 became what it is today, because earlier versions looked incredibly different. Team Fortress is a class and team-based multiplayer online first-person shooter video game developed by Valve. And if you haven't played it yet, I suggest you go ahead and download it, because since 2011 Team Fortress 2 is free to play. The story of Team Fortress began, just like many other successful Valve games, with a mod. But unlike Counter-Strike or Day of Defeat, the origin of Team Fortress is much older than the Gold Source engine. For many Team Fortress 2 players, the original Team Fortress is just this strange Half-Life lookalike Team Fortress Classic, but what many don't know, Team Fortress Classic is based upon a Quake modification. This mod, simply called Team Fortress or Quake World Team Fortress, was a huge success when it came out in 1996, and was a favorite amongst the Quake community, with at some point almost 50% of all servers running the modification. The mod's developers soon opened their own studio, simply called Team Fortress Software, to provide official support for the game as well as frequent updates. After their huge success with Team Fortress Software wanted to begin their work on Team Fortress 2 as a mod based on the Quake 2 engine. But before that project came to life, they were approached by Valve, who at the time were working on Half-Life, which, as all of you know, became a major success. The mod team, consisting of Robin Walker, John Cook and Ian Corley, joined Valve and started working on Team Fortress 2, now with the all-new Half-Life/Gold Source engine. This new build of Team Fortress got the working title Valve's Team Fortress, and from what we see on the released screenshots, this game had a bit more of a realistic setting compared to the original. The direction towards the later announced Team Fortress 2 Brotherhood of Arms was already clearly visible. Valve's Team Fortress was to introduce not only realistic weapons like the Uzi, M16A2 and Browning 50 cal machine guns, but also vehicles like the M1 Abrams and the Bradley, as well as heavy weaponry like the M198 howitzer. If you played the original Half-Life, you might recognize some of these models, and in fact, a lot of these assets were recycled from Half-Life, but we can assume that these were merely placeholders, like the Half-Life MP5 in this screenshot from a E3 presentation in 1998. The classes of the original game were still present in this version of Team Fortress, even though they were renamed to fit the more realistic setting. Some classes were given abilities they didn't have before. For example, the sniper was to be able to be invisible for up to 20 seconds. One completely new class was also to be added to the game, the Commander. He was to be the main, non-physical class of the game. He would have been able to see the entire battlefield through teammates' eyes and cameras set up by the engineer. He was also to be able to create and control squads and groups, as well as issue orders to players currently fighting on the battlefield. Other classes would be the Light Infantry, Valve's Team Fortress's version of the Scout equipped with an Uzi, the Field Medic, a class wielding an M16 and of course carrying a first aid bag, the Heavy Infantry, a machine gunner of sorts, this game's heavy weapons guy, the Rocket Infantry. As you can guess, this was to be this version's soldier, of course equipped with a rocket launcher. But contrary to all other Team Fortress games, he could only fire in crouch or prone position, and maybe most notably, he was supposed to have a jetpack. The next class, the Sniper, with the previously mentioned ability to get invisible and equipped with a M40A1 sniper rifle. You know, the one known from Half-Life Opposing Force. The Commando, a Demoman prototype equipped with a grenade launcher. Next class, the Spy, he was to be a stealth class equipped with an Uzi and was to be able to cloak as the enemies he killed. And the last real class, the Engineer, which is basically the same in all Team Fortress games, and I guess I don't have to explain much about him. And last but not least, there was the Medium Infantry, which was sort of a placeholder for the Engineer and Sniper, so this one was not planned to be in the final game. As it turned out, development of Team Fortress 2, or back then called Valve's Team Fortress, was halted in favor of another project sometime after the E3 1998. Valve wanted to demonstrate the modding capabilities of their new Gold Source engine to the community, so the developers created a version of Team Fortress on the basis of the Gold Source/Half-Life engine that was much closer to the original Quake mod. This mod is what we know today under the title Team Fortress Classic, released on April 1st, 1999. Notably, Team Fortress Classic was built entirely within the publicly available gold source software development kit to, like previously mentioned, set an example to the community and the industry of the Half-Life engine's flexibility. And what players of the original WON version of Team Fortress Classic might have noticed back in the days, the game has some leftovers from the development phase of Valve's Team Fortress. The loading screen background has a very different style compared to the actual game. It features a tank and soldiers in old US Army style uniforms. The game was first released as a modification for Half-Life. In the year 2000, the game saw a major update with new maps, new in-game menu structure and most notably new player models and of course a netcode optimization as well. Since 2003, Team Fortress Classic is a standalone game and is obtainable through the Steam store. At 1999's E3, Valve presented a trailer of a new version of Team Fortress 2 with the additional title Brotherhood of Arms. Team Fortress 2 Brotherhood of Arms was to put an even stronger emphasis on realistic combat than the previous version of Team Fortress 2, aka Valve's Team Fortress. It was to be a military shooter set in modern times with a command hierarchy including the commander from the previous version, but with even more abilities. There were to be generally more gameplay elements, parachute drops over enemy territory, network voice communication and numerous other innovations including not only gameplay changes but also technological advances. Brotherhood of Arms was to use a variety of new technologies, such as a system called parametric animation. This would, according to an old GameSpot article, mesh various animations together so to appear more realistic. For example, if a person dies while jumping, he would somehow slump to the ground while in the air. And in Team Fortress 2, parametric animations would make it so that the person killed while jumping would go limp in the air and would finally slump when he hits the ground. Of course, a technology that became obsolete with the introduction of ragdoll physics. There was also to be voice communication via microphones. In addition, the player's mouth would move while talking, a standard in modern titles but back then a new feature, which got reused in Counter-Strike. The game could also dynamically change the amount of polygons on a model, depending on the model's distance to the viewer and the total amount of models visible to the player. Here we see a player model with a very low level of detail. Now we are slowly increasing the level of detail. You have to imagine these details increase as the enemy player is coming closer towards you. Comparing the lowest and the highest level of detail, it is quite a difference, and one must admit that the details on the player model are very good for around 1999, almost 20 years ago. This technology was developed to save resources on slower computers, but as computers got better and with the implementation of the Source engine, it became obsolete. But try to remember your computer from around 2000. It would have made sense to have this technology back then. Besides these technical innovations, the game was also to feature several new game modes, such as escort missions, interception missions, D-Day-like beach assaults, as well as a very interesting game mode that according to GameStar magazine was to be kind of like Rainbow Six Siege. One team was to entrench themselves or set up defensive positions in a building. They had around 1 minute to do that, but it is unclear which tools they had to do that because we only know for sure about the tripod-mounted machine gun. It is also unknown what the attacking team was to do during the setup period. Maybe they had ways to scout out the defender's position, or they simply had to wait. While Team Fortress 2 Brotherhood of Arms was not supposed to have a real single-player campaign, the developers wanted to create a very detailed training mode with specialized training missions for each class. In these you would have been accompanied by an NPC instructor. And speaking of classes, there were a few changes made compared to the previous Team Fortress 2/Valve's Team Fortress, and of course, these classes differ a lot from Team Fortress Classic. The Marine would be a more realistic version of the soldier. He would have had an assault rifle and a rocket launcher, and no jetpack anymore. The machine gunner was essentially a realistic heavy, like in the previous version. The sniper, commando, flamethrower guy, and ranger, previously known as the light infantry, were essentially the same as in the previous version. The officer would be a completely new class and should not be confused with the commander. The officer would increase the player's morale and lead the charge. He would have been equipped with infrared goggles and smoke grenades to provide cover. The field medic would have been quite different from the classic medic. His only ability would have been to heal and revive teammates as well as pull them out of the line of fire, according to an old GameStar report. The field medic wouldn't have been equipped with suitable equipment for attacking enemy bases, though I still assume at least they would have given him a pistol for self-defense. The engineer was to be very similar to his classic counterpart. However, sentries could not be moved around without destroying them. Apparently, an unlimited amount of sentries could be built, but the engineer would need to build energy sources in order to power them. Also, engineers could build fixed emplacements, such as mounted machine guns, which would have been used by other players. One example of these guns can be seen here in this trailer. Notice the medic bringing in new ammunition for the gunner. The spy would have been very similar to the spy from the previous build, but instead of a knife, he would have used a wire to choke his enemies to death, like seen here in this trailer. And last but not least, the commander. He was to be almost identical to the one from the previous version, with the addition of being able to place buildings in the map and provide air support. But I assume these abilities were limited to certain game modes like the Siege game mode. After the cancellation of this project, several technologies and assets developed for this game got reused in other Valve titles, like the before mentioned speech animation technology in Counter-Strike, and another example is the Team Fortress classic map Avanti, whose textures and art style were originally developed for Team Fortress 2 Brotherhood of Arms. And before we move on to the next stage in development of Team Fortress 2, I need to make a little side note here. Even though Brotherhood of Arms was cancelled, without it we would have never gotten the famous Counter-Strike maps DE Dust and D-Dust 2. The inspiration for Dust, on which Dust 2 is based on, came from early Team Fortress 2 Brotherhood of Arms promotion screenshots. And when you look at them, the inspiration is clearly visible. In the mid-2000s, Valve announced that the work on Team Fortress 2 Brotherhood of Arms was stopped due to development switching to an in-house developed engine that became known as the Source Engine. Around that time there was a total news blackout in relation to Team Fortress that lasted until July 2006, when Team Fortress 2 was revealed at Electronic Arts' Summer Showcase event. And that's everything as far as the official story goes, if it weren't for a big leak. In 2003, a German hacker stole the Half-Life 2 source tree and along with it a whole bunch of other stuff. Besides a working Counter-Strike source build, an unfinished version of Half-Life 2 and various other abandoned projects, the stolen files included Team Fortress 2 models along with a work-in-progress Team Fortress 2 source code. This version of Team Fortress 2 became known as Team Fortress 2 Invasion, not to be confused with the TF2 Invasion update. A mod team, back then called Gabe's Laptop, now called Missing Information Team, created a playable version of this leaked build. That came to be known as the Xmas build. This build of Team Fortress is a rather futuristic-looking team-based shooter with RTS elements. The two opposing teams are humans and aliens. Both teams come in a more cartoonish-looking style, a very different design when considering the fact that the previous approach tried to be as realistic as possible. Looking at the style of the maps, some people thought the game was to be set in the Half-Life universe, but that is rather unlikely when looking at the two leaked player models. They are supposed to be models for the Commando class, the counterpart to the regular Team Fortress's Soldier. TF2 Invasion's classes were generally identical to the classic Team Fortress setup. However, not all of them are implemented in the build available. It only features 6 classes. The previously mentioned Commando, the Defender, this game's Heavy, the Escort, which is a new class with not much known about it, probably a protective class for those who should be escorted like the Civilian in older Team Fortress games. The Medic, whose purpose is kind of obvious. The Pyro, he is similar to his classic counterpart, but in addition to the flame gun he appears to have an ice cannon, or simply a fire extinguisher. These two weapons were later combined into the Pyro's secondary fire capability. The Pyro also has a grenade launcher available, but I think this gun belongs to the not included Demo Man. Another class available in the playable version is the Sapper. It is unclear if this was supposed to be a spy because there's another class referenced in the game files called the Infiltrator. Other classes only mentioned in the game files are as follows: the Scout, here called Reconnaissance, the Sniper class, the Demo Man, who is called the Support class in this game, and the last non-included class is the Engineer. Apparently every class is able to build these little things in unlimited quantities. This led to quite silly situations when testing the game, when the whole map was covered in these things. The Engineer class, however, would have probably been the only class that could build more powerful buildings, which played a very significant part in this version of Team Fortress. And yes, we are playing Team Fortress on Dust 2. And yes, the mod team replaced all error models with a descriptive word for a certain part of the male anatomy. The dick, to be precise. The previous TF2 version Brotherhood of Arms were to feature a commander able to set up fortifications. In the invasion concept, the construction of buildings were to be a far bigger aspect of the game. The game's concept is based around gathering resources by killing enemy players. These resources would be added to the team's resource bank, which apparently was to be a building that had to be protected from the opposing team. With these gathered resources, the team would be able to research better equipment and abilities, but also construct more buildings, such as the power bank, a sentry gun, buff stations, teleporters, barbed wire, bunkers, and most interestingly, the vehicle bay. The power pack would have been a power generator for buildings that needed power. The sentry gun would have been very similar to the classic sentry, but it is unknown if it were to have multiple levels. According to TF Wiki, the buff station would have been very similar to the classic dispenser, in that it gives ammo and armor. It might were also able to heal players. Another probable building would have been the teleporter station, essentially a teleporter like the one from Team Fortress Classic. Some sources list that the teleporter is a vehicle, however I assume that it were to be constructed like a building and was not designed to be mobile. Barbed wire would have been used to deny enemy access to certain areas, however it was to be easily destroyed. Barbed wire sounds like an idea that made it over into the invasion build from Team Fortress Brotherhood of Arms, because the gameplay element of blocking paths sounds like something from the Rainbow Six Siege-like game mode. That's just speculation. The bunker would be a strong defensive building. However, just like the vehicle bay, it is unknown how big they were supposed to be, or even how they were supposed to be constructed during the game. Probably the biggest new thing in this version of Team Fortress would have been, next to buildings such as the vehicle bay, the vehicles themselves, which were to be constructed using the gathered resources. The vehicle list were to include a transporter called the Wagon, a battering ram, a vehicle used to knock down defensive structures such as barbed wire, a tank, of which sadly no concept art exists, a Strider, possibly an Alien exclusive vehicle which used the Half-Life 2 Strider model, though I am fairly certain that was just a placeholder. And the last vehicle would be the Mini Strider, which would be, well, a small Strider. The Mini Strider is actually something we have concept art for, and it fits right next to the design style of the Alien player model. Other concept art shows further possible vehicles and aliens, such as this gigantic alien and this alien ship. In the end, let us have a look at the weapons and player models included in this playable build. The Heavy's gun, or here called Defender, is very close to the Heavy's gun from Team Fortress Classic, but in this leaked version of Team Fortress it has an incredibly annoying firing sound. The firing mode of the medic gun, ignoring the Half-Life 2 beta model placeholder, is somewhat similar to the medic gun of the final game, but unlike the final game it can also be used to repair buildings. Some classes also carry a shotgun from the Half-Life 2 beta. More unique weapons are these three guns found in the playable build, some kind of burst rifles and laser guns. These two guns share the same projectile type in this build. The interesting thing is that the projectiles have a significant drop after a few meters, so the weapon's range is very limited, but the bullet drop can be used to your advantage with some experience. Looking at some of the weapon animations included in the game files, it appears as if you were to be able to fire grenades from an underbarrel launcher, as well as utilize the gun as a close combat weapon. Unfortunately, these features were never included in the playable build, or simply never finished by Valve. This, let us call it the laser gun, is a single-shot weapon with a small bipod, so I am fairly certain that this was supposed to be the sniper's gun. All weapons included in the game are the human version. The game files speak of alien equivalents, but none of them were leaked. The before-mentioned escort class is also equipped with a force shield, which is in a rather broken state. And probably the most notable thing is this tactical shield, which looks very similar to the one from Counter-Strike. It has no real use in the playable build, but what is interesting, the shield includes a wide range of animations, including one animation that looks like as if you were able to utilize the shield in close combat. And now the two player models. The human looks fairly simple, a cartoonish human. The alien on the other side has some interesting features. It has a somewhat transparent torso and a shield covering up the head that can be lifted. The overall design looks like an armored suit or some kind of mix of living being and armor. The aliens in general have a pretty interesting design philosophy. Other weapons and player models included in the game files are merely leftovers from the Half-Life 2 beta, so not that interesting at this point. The last thing to mention about the Invasion design and the Xmas build is that there was a group of modders that tried to recreate Team Fortress 2 Invasion in its entirety. They started replacing broken elements with Half-Life 2 placeholders and stuff from other source games. There is a video on YouTube showing some interesting progress they made, but the last post on the Team Gaben wiki and the video itself are several years old. Sadly, the project appears to be abandoned. The version of Team Fortress that we know as Invasion is incredibly complex, and it appears that this complexity is what ultimately led to the decision to abandon this concept and restart once again. All this led to the creation of the cartoonish retro concept we know today. this new approach enabled developers to create a more fun and less serious game and not focused on realism. This becomes abundantly clear when comparing it to the early versions, Quake Team Fortress and Team Fortress Classic, and especially Valve's Team Fortress and TF2 Brotherhood of Arms. Valve worked on the final version of Team Fortress 2 in almost complete silence, and not much is known about the development phase of the final design. So back in 2007, when Team Fortress 2 was revealed to the public, people were surprised to see this unusual and fresh concept, a complete reboot of Team Fortress in a different style. Team Fortress 2 became a major success for Valve, and the massive amount of players 10 years later after the release proved that. The Team Fortress 2 we know today varies a lot from the launch version. Game modes like Payload have been added, as well as various other updates, including one called Invasion. Regardless of the success, not all fans were pleased with the design decisions taken by Valve, so mods like Team Fortress 2 Classic and Team Fortress Forever were born. They tried to recreate the feeling of older Team Fortress games or re-implement the cut content of Team Fortress. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed our look into the 9-year development period of Team Fortress 2. Special thanks to 2ARX, who helped me a lot with Team Fortress 2 Invasion. Now, I am really curious what you guys think about the two abandoned concepts, Brotherhood of Arms and Invasion. Which one do you find more interesting? Would you like to see one of those concepts being reworked into a new game, or do you think they were dropped for good? I'm interested in reading your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed this video, consider giving it a thumbs up and maybe check out some of our other videos, like the cut content of Counter-Strike series. So, have a nice day, and as always, goodbye and guten Tag.